Most of us have been raised on stuff that is not actually bread. It is bread in the sense that it's yeast and it's flour and it's water, but it has a bunch of other stuff added to it, and it's not the same as the real historical bread that we've been eating for generations, right? And this was a thing long before people were having metabolic issues, and long before people were carrying so much extra weight around the midsection. Sourdough has been around for a long time, and I consider this like a historically accurate, good food to eat as a human being. Now, if you're metabolically dysfunctional and you're having metabolic issues, I don't think any kind of refined starches at all are going to be super beneficial. But if you were to add one back in, it would probably be a fermented sourdough. So let's go ahead and talk about what makes it different. The first thing I'm going to talk about is rooted in science, and it's talking about how it affects bloating, and it has to do with what is called the FODMAP score. So we'll talk about this, and we'll talk about a few other ones. After today's video, I put a link down below for Manukora Manuka honey. This is the best tasting, creamiest, smoothest honey that I have ever had in my life. So their starter pack is going to have 5 travel sticks of Manuka honey. It's going to have a tub of their 850 MGO honey. I'll talk about what MGO is in a second. And you're also getting a wooden spoon and a guide on how to use it. You only need about a teaspoon a day of this stuff. So if you're thinking, I don't want a bunch of sugar, you don't need a bunch of sugar. Like Manuka honey is so powerful, and Manukora gets their Manuka honey from the remote forests of New Zealand, where you're supposed to, with some of the highest MGO content in the world. And they third-party test every single harvest. So that way you know you're getting the good antimicrobial, antioxidant effect of Manuka honey that you should be getting. So it's not about the carbohydrates, it's about the benefit you're getting from the honey. So that link down below, if you want the best tasting honey you've ever had, check them out in the top line of the description underneath this video. This study that was published in Grain and Oil in Science and Technology found there was a 30% decrease in fermentable sugars and starches in sourdough bread compared to refined bread. What that means is a 30% to 40% decrease in FODMAPs. Okay, these are fermentable like oligosaccharides and things that would cause bloating and issues. So in other words, less bloating when you consume sourdough, which tells us maybe our bodies are a little bit better off using the nutrients that are in this. Now, is there a lot of nutritional value? I mean, if you're making it with real good quality ingredients, there is some mineral value. I mean, it's not gonna be like eating some ground beef or eating some good quality vegetables or fruit, but you're getting some decent stuff. The second thing is, like it or not, there is a reduced gluten content. And I say like it or not because most people say gluten issues are very black and white. Okay, you either have celiac or you don't. So you're telling me that someone is either off or on with a gluten sensitivity? I am not celiac, but I know for a fact that if I have straight up gluten, at least in the United States, I am bloated, I am miserable, and my joints hurt. Okay, that's just me. So I'll just take my opinion with it. But the bottom line is that sourdough reduces the actual gluten content. It stabilizes the protein more and actually reduces some of the gliadin and ultimately the gluten content. So if you're someone that's like, hey, I don't know how I feel with gluten, sourdough would be an easy place to start. Number 2, a lot of the starches become a resistant starch. So they actually turn into a sort of a fiber. Not a fiber in the literal sense that we think of, but they become resistant to digestion in certain ways, which means that they actually end up digesting in a different way and not actually fully digesting, but feeding some of the beneficial microbes in our gut. So it's a gut healthy food compared to regular bread, probably just being problematic more than anything. This also lets it become lower glycemic, so it's going to affect blood sugar significantly less, which is quite fascinating. Now, to kind of dovetail on that one, number 3 is it becomes much more of a prebiotic food. Now, prebiotics are foods like garlic and maybe some onions and things like that. What happens is they break down and they are actually consistent of a fiber that will feed our microbes. So it's the same kind of thing, but fermented sourdough actually becomes somewhat prebiotic, which sounds counterintuitive because you lower the FODMAP score, which means less bloating, yet you're increasing prebiotics, which could actually cause bloating in some people. But because these prebiotics are more than likely fueling beneficial microbes in our gut, you're actually getting a gut health benefit and less likely to get bloating, at least compared to regular bread. The fourth thing is there's less density with more impact. What I mean by that is sourdough bread actually becomes more dense in many ways. It's got a fluffy texture, but as far as the actual quality, because you ferment, some of it breaks down, it becomes more dense, and it's actually more satiating. Now, bread in any capacity isn't going to be the first thing that I would reach for if I was trying to satiate myself. Okay, the bottom line is that it's still going to be something that could cause a blood sugar spike and make you more hungry. But let's also be real. It's a pretty lean, low-fat way to get some volume in. And when you're talking sourdough, you're gonna get more volume and density, and you're probably gonna get more satiety out of it. So if you talk to people that are eating real sourdough bread, they only need a slice or two before they're full. Compared to like making sandwiches with whatever bread you're getting from Costco, you're gonna just want more and more and more and more. The next thing is a really interesting one. There are likely less mycotoxins. What's interesting is because of the increased acidity level, is it actually preserves better. So that's why a lot of breads that are on the shelf, they need preservatives, they need these additives just to keep it on the shelf. Not to mention, there's probably some money grabbing going on, and keeping it on the shelf longer is gonna make more money, and that makes more sense. But from a mycotoxin perspective and a mold perspective, so there's visible mold that we might see, right? We're like, I'm not gonna eat that. But then there's smaller scale levels of mycotoxins and mold that we may not see. And again, you sound a little woo-woo if you start going down the mold rabbit hole, but the reality is, it's a serious thing. So if you're having a bread that is fresher, that is naturally more resistant to things like that without having to have the preservatives, doesn't that seem like a more logical, realistic, naturally good thing to eat? So that's a huge benefit there, is the shelf stability when you make it. It's gonna stay better longer, and it's going to have a less chance of getting moldy or even going stale. Now, speaking of the acid, the next thing is, because of the lactic acid increase in sourdough bread, it actually drives down and competes with another acid called phytic acid. Phytic acid is commonly known as an anti-nutrient. Okay, with a lot of people online talking about anti-nutrients, and it's not invalid. Anti-nutrients can be a problem. Anti-nutrients essentially block the absorption of minerals. So you're blocking the absorption of calcium, of magnesium, of zinc. Okay, some of these things that are going to be in the sourdough bread in the first place. So when you have things like the fermentation process occurring, you're increasing lactic acid. Sometimes there's even lactic acid starters, right? That breaks down or decreases the phytic acid, which means more mineral and nutrient availability out of the bread itself. Not to mention, you're not counteracting some of the food you might be taking in with the bread. By preserving those minerals and their ability to be absorbed, you actually get better value out of what you're eating. Within that same ballpark, if you're someone that's concerned with lectins, which I don't think is a huge concern, but it still brings up a question, right? Sourdough bread is going to decrease the amount of lectins, but it's also going to decrease the amount of amylase, tryptase, and amylase inhibitors. So basically what that means is you are going to utilize more of the nutrients from the starch. Don't get that mistaken by things like amylase inhibitors that are in raspberries, for example. Raspberries have an amylase inhibitor, which makes it so that when you eat raspberries, you actually slow down the digestion of some starches and slow down the digestion of the sugars in the raspberry itself. That can be beneficial for glycemic control. But when you have too much in the way of amylase, then you can actually end up having a bigger spike in blood sugar, and you can also have a just more digestive problem with it. So when you're able to kind of break some of that process up, it makes it so the bread digests and assimilates easier. You're getting the nutritional value out of it. The next one is more a sustainability thing. I don't think people realize how reliant we are on commercial yeast, which is not always a good sustainable thing, and it's not always a healthy thing. So because when you create sourdough bread, you have that fermentable mother. That mother could last for generations, quite literally. In a good bakery that's making artisanal sourdough bread, that mother's lasting a long time. And that is recycling, and they're not needing a reliance on commercial yeast, which saves money and is probably better for the environment and better for us. And the last thing that I can go without saying is it tastes better. No one's going to deny that good quality sourdough tastes better. The big caveat here is this is not a license to eat as much of it as you want. Let's be real here. We're just saying, hey, this is better than regular bread, and it might be more of a health food than people would give it credit for. See you tomorrow.